Welcome, everyone. Thank you again for your interest in this presentation series that we're doing. I wanted to welcome you. My name is Terry Schultz. I'm a senior conservation ecologist with the Nature Conservancy in Colorado. And I have been working on the LandPKS project for several years now. But the main driver of this LandPKS work is Jeff Herrick. So Jeff, would you please introduce yourself?
Jeff Herrick, a soil scientist with the USDA Ag Research Service in Las Cruces, New Mexico at the Jornada. I guess probably better described as a range scientist at this point in my career. And yeah, really happy to be here. And we'll just acknowledge this has really been a huge collaborative effort. And Terry's and the team of the Nature Conservancy has played a really significant role as particularly as we've started to focus more on the United States. LandPKS started as something that was used primarily in Africa. So thanks, Terry.
If you do have questions while we're going through the program, or when Jeff's doing the demo, please drop those in the chat and these guys will be monitoring that. So thank you. All right, let's get started. So this is a 3-week series here, and last week we showed how you can learn about your land and its potential using the LandPKS app. This week, we are looking at monitoring vegetation and understanding habitat. And next week, I hope you will return and hear about monitoring soil health with LandPKS. So for today, we'll talk a bit about the overview. I think it's helpful to just remember where these modules and information input and output modules fit within the whole LandPKS app itself. We'll talk a little bit about accessing soil and ecological site information just as the context for monitoring vegetation and habitat. We'll go into the habitat portion of the module, the output module, talk about monitoring vegetation. Jeff will give you a live demo of all that. Then we'll spend a little bit of time at the end talking about resources and then have some time for questions. Right. So as a reminder, we learned last week too that land potential is really about defining that long-term ability of the land to produce, sustainably generate ecosystem services. So that could be the production capacity of the land. It could also be about potential resilience. As a reminder, the LandPKS app is free, available in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. It really does help you do these things to determine your land's potential, access that soil, ecological site, and habitat information, monitor soil health, vegetation cover, structure, and also keep management records. So there are 6 report modules, and we're highlighting here with the little leaf 4 of those modules, those output reporting modules that have information in them before you even collect data, set up a plot. So you can get information on your soil through the land info module. There's some imagery and such that you can access through the vegetation module. The habitat will show you, we'll talk about that in greater detail in a little bit, but it does show you what species you are within the range for the species that are in the app right at that point in time. And then climate information you can access as well. There are 4 input modules. We spent quite a bit of time last week talking about the land info module. And I also wanted to highlight there is a land management module where you can document the activities and actions that you're taking on your land, and the soil health module, that's for next week. So please come back and learn more about that. And then today, what we'll be talking about is the LandCover module. And so these are how they're related. The vegetation report comes from that LandCover data that you input. The habitat module actually accesses information from both the land info and LandCover, depending upon what the ideal habitat is for a species. There are some species that need a certain soil type, be that sandy soils or tighter soils so that they could dig a burrow, for instance. And then there are species that are dependent upon the vegetation often. And so that's where the vegetation cover information is related to that. I did also want to highlight with the leaf that when you go and enter information, the next time you look at the app, it'll have a leaf to show you on the report that there's new reporting information. So it's automatically summarizing that information and shows you that that's new and available to you. So one of the most important things I think about LandPKS is that it really does help you to do adaptive management. But I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about why you might want to do adaptive management. Really, through adaptive management, it can help lead to more thoughtful, proactive management because you're thinking ahead about what are my goals, what am I trying to accomplish, and am I accomplishing that? It helps you make better decisions because you have reliable information that you're basing those decisions on. It also lets you react and act more quickly when you're thinking more long-term about where am I going and how quickly am I getting there, and is that soon enough? And then it also helps you test and improve your understanding of your land by setting up some assumptions that you're testing through that monitoring information. This is just a very simple adaptive management process. First you plan, you set those goals, you start to think about what actions you're going to take. Then you go out there and take those actions, you do that work. You want to monitor and evaluate and then adapt. And this is how LandPKS fits into that process. LandPKS will help you identify through the inventory process, identifying what your soils are, what kind of habitat you might have. It helps you through that assessment, evaluation process, and thinking about the current condition of those. And the rest of the adaptive management process is shown here, but in the end, it's coming back to that monitoring to help kind of close the loop and evaluate and modify your actions as needed. So in learning about your soils, we learned a great deal about this last week, but I wanted to highlight again that when you first go into the app, you can access soil information, and this is globally. In the US, this links up to the NRCS soil maps and soil databases, but internationally, it does link up to other soil maps as well. So you can get an idea of what has been identified at the location that you're at. It's really helpful to know about what your soils are, or what's been mapped in the area. Then in the US, especially, this is linked to a couple of other NRCS databases in terms of the land capability class and the ecological site description databases. And now we wanted to go in a little bit more detail on the habitat reporting module. And I wanted to give a great thank you and shout out to the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, who have been our partner in this effort in creating the information that's in the app on majority of the bird species that are in the app now and will be in the future. They've been writing those fact sheets and pulling together that information that goes into this app. So we really appreciate the collaboration that we've had with them as well. So the report module will tell you whether you are within the range of a species. And I'll show you a little diagram here in a minute that will highlight that. It will provide you with habitat information and ideal habitat characteristics for that species. And then you can access information on management as well. So what is habitat? Habitat is the natural home and environment of a plant, an animal, an organism. And just like with people, what does a species need? It needs shelter, water, food, and space. But what kind of shelter, what kind of space do they need? What kind of habitat? And this is really what we're getting at with the app. So all of the existence of that habitat is really dependent upon the land's potential. So the soil and what it can or cannot grow, and how it is managed. So this is why we wanted to put as much information as we can in the hands of land managers to understand what species might need and how you might be able to manage better for them that's what you want to do. So you can see on this diagram, there's a little point location. For that particular point location, they're within the range of 3 different species. So in the first graphic showing what the app looks like, you can see mule deer, pronghorn antelope, brewer sparrow, and a variety of other species that will show up at your location. Within the app itself, we have a description of those species and a little graphic that shows what the habitat looks like, how tall the vegetation is, what the species are keying in on. And then there's a table that has more detailed information about what is ideal habitat might look like. And the habitat characteristics are those that you might be collecting data on. So it would be the soil information and then vegetation information at a location. And when you do go out and collect data, the final column will have information in it that will compare the data at your location with the range that the species requires. You can download fact sheets. I'm going to go back just a second. In that last screen on the right, you can see a download fact sheet button. That is available to you. If you download that information before you go in the field, when you do have internet, you'll have the fact sheet when you're out in the field. You can access this information, as I said, on your phone. You can also access it from the website if you want to look at a larger version of it and download it or print it out. This has scientific information about how to identify and identify the species, where it might be, how to look for it, as well as a description of the species, its range, and best management practices. We've really written these best management practices for landowners and land managers in thinking about what will benefit the species and what things you might avoid if you're trying to provide good habitat for the species. So tangible management actions that you can take and feasible management actions. In no way do we say do not graze livestock, but we might say it would be better where the species lives if the habitat looked this way. It was really short because they like to nest on very short vegetation, or if it was really tall during nesting season. So those are the kinds of things we're trying to provide that really are tangible and actionable things that you can take. And as we said, this is also available on the website in the Knowledge Hub, as well as available to you on your phone. Next step is, conducting that monitoring after you, when you start thinking about collecting data on vegetation or other information. And we wanted to just provide a little bit of framework on thinking about where you might want to establish monitoring points. And that really boils down to, what is the question you're trying to answer? Are you wanting to do an assessment? Do you have specific goals about the amount of vegetation cover or bare ground that you want to see on your land? Or is there a certain obstacle that you're really trying to see if you can minimize over time? So once you have the question you're trying to answer, you then also want to think about the scale of that question. Are you concerned about this one pasture, this one area, the whole ranch, or a particular disturbed area? Are you trying to rehabilitate or restore an area around where there's been some disturbance? You want to pick as representative an area as if appropriate, and thinking about, you want this pasture to all be in good condition, and define good condition by a certain amount of cover, a certain amount of bare ground. You want to look for areas that have similar conditions. So in terms of soils, how that soil is mapped, and vegetation, so that it's somewhat homogeneous within where you're going to be collecting that data. If it's a restoration site, you want to look for, again, somewhat homogeneous conditions in terms of soil and vegetation and level of disturbance to put that monitoring plot down. And it's always important to start with a random starting point, and that can be just go into the middle of the area where it's somewhat homogeneous and turn around and throw your hat, and that's where you start. So don't bias your information by picking a particular place, but go to a general location. Then for monitoring ideas, it's always important to keep it as simple as possible. The thing I really like about LandPKS is that it is a nice, simple, and repeatable way to collect data in a very consistent manner. And different people will collect basically the same information. And incorporate that monitoring into your existing work where possible. And then it's really important to store and interpret the data, and LandPKS does a lot of that for you. So with monitoring, it's important to think about those input modules on LandPKS. And here's just a snapshot of what those look like. And today we're going to cover the LandCover part of the equation. First, let me focus on land info. And this is what we covered last week. So if you want to look in greater detail, Tegan sent out the invitation. She put in the link to the presentation that we gave last week, and you guys are welcome to go back and look at that one in more detail if you're interested in thinking about soil texture and soil color and identifying the soil at your point location more specifically. Once you have that information, it will move on to LandCover input module. These are quick vegetation transects, and they focus on collecting additional information on dominant woody species and non-woody species. When you first get into the output module for vegetation, it shows trends and imagery. So these are just some examples of some global data sets that are within the app itself, and based on your GPS location, you'll see some information on satellite imagery and some greenness index. And just wanted to show you, Jeff will go into this in more detail, but the LandCover monitoring, and the first screen there on the left is how you collect the vegetation data. And as you can see there, it really is picture-based and meant to be as easily seen and repeatable and understandable. And you need a yardstick, a yard or a meter stick, and about 20 minutes to collect this data. Click on different icons, which we'll get into just the next slide. We'll jump into that. And then, but also wanted to show you that once you've collected that data, you get a report like you see on the right. And while this one looks like it's one point in time, it also will show you trends over time. If you go back and recollect at the same place, you'll have some nice graphs that show you how things are changing over time in terms of cover. That is the final slide I'm going to show. We're now going to move into the vegetation monitoring and habitat demo, and I will stop sharing and hand it over to Jeff.
Great, thanks, Terry. And let's see if we can get this going. Can you all see the screen of the map? Excellent. All right. So for those of you that just joined this time and not the last time, you might want to go back and review how to create a plot. And what I've done here actually is I haven't necessarily created a plot. I've gone to the map icon down at the bottom, and it brings up a map of all of my points that I've collected in the past, and I can zoom in or out on that. And today I'm just going to go down to southeastern Colorado, to the Comanche National Grasslands, and we're just going to quickly create a plot here. And once I create a plot, I need to give it a name. So I'll just say test site. Okay. Of course, I can keep my data private or not. I'll just go ahead and leave that public for now. And what it's doing now is not only creating the plot, but downloading a lot of different data. Data about the soils, data about the habitat, and also some additional data about the vegetation, the current vegetation there. And anytime I've got new data that have been downloaded to the phone or that I've collected and are showing up here on the report side, this leaf shows up. Okay, so these leaves indicate that there is actually some information there that you might want to take a look at. When I tap on the land info, of course, I can see what my soils are in this area, and they're pretty variable. I've got some information here on vegetation already, and sometimes this takes some time to download. So if you don't see a leaf there, it means it hasn't downloaded yet, and it may take, particularly if you don't have a good connection, it may take a few minutes, or it may not even show up until the next time you open the app. But this is a satellite image. This next one is actually showing the trends in greenness from 2014 to 2019. And so, whereas this one is just saying what the greenness is, so how much vegetation there is, or how much green vegetation there is in 2019. And you can see actually the riparian zones jump out pretty well. This next one shows how the trend has been in greenness from 2014 to 2019, with the red indicating a decline in green cover and the green indicating an increase in green cover. So this is basically giving you a snapshot of the type of information you might get from other tools that you find online, like the Rangelands app. And then we can actually look at a graph of those trends over time. We can also go then to the habitat, which also has a green leaf, so it means there's some information there. And it's listing, as Terry indicated, all of the species that we have included in the app that happen to be have their range. So their range occurs there. That doesn't mean you'll find the species there, but the species range includes that location. And one of the things to note here is you're seeing a lot of species, and that's not by accident. We're in Colorado, and the habitat module was initially developed by a group in Colorado using species that occur in Colorado largely, as well as elsewhere.
Jeff, I forgot to mention that currently there are 22 species in the app, and all for only for North America, and that we'll have another about that many coming online in the next later on in the year, probably in the summer, and we hope to have more later on in the year as well. But they will all only be restricted to North America, so that's the only time you would see the app.
Right. Otherwise, that module simply won't show up outside of North America, right, on your report screen. So if I go, for example, to the Swift Fox, it's going to give me some information about the habitat characteristics, a picture showing you what a typical habitat is for the Swift Fox, a little bit of a description, and then some of the actual indicators. So it prefers loam to sandy loam soil for digging dens. And as you can see here, I don't have any data yet. Percent shrub cover should be fairly low. Vegetation height should also be low. These are not tall animals, and they hunt. And the slope then less than 15%. Now I'm going to go ahead and rather than starting to enter all those data now, I'm going to jump over to a plot where I have already entered some of these data. We'll go ahead and enter some of them as well. And again, it's at the same general location. I've called it a Comanche National Grasslands demo. And let's go over to the data input side. Of course, on land info, sorry, we'll go to the data input side. Here we go. So land info, I can enter my slope here, we saw last time, and it's a fairly flat location. And then I can go to the soil texture, which it was also asking about, and just enter textures for the surface layer, which is where they would be digging their dens. And so I've got that in there. And then I go down to the other question they were asking was about the cover, the vegetation cover. Well, I can use that stick method that Terry mentioned. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this because we didn't cover this in the last session. To enter land cover data, I add a new transect. I add the date, okay, we'll just use today. And And then here it says, well, you've already started entering data. Do you want to go ahead and edit that? Because it's only going to let me enter it for 1 day. And so I'll say, yeah, okay, let's go ahead and edit my current plot. I've already entered some data there. And this is the screen that shows up. And the first thing that it does is asks, would you like to put in the dominant woody species? Because we're not actually going to record currently in LandPKS species to the species level. We'll just do it to the functional or structural group level. So anybody been to the national grasslands, Terry? You want to tell me what woody species might be dominant there?
None.
None?
No, there
No
might
woody species at all?
no. There might be greasewood.
Might be greasewood? Okay, let's go ahead and throw that in there. And again, this doesn't mean that it's dominant. It's just the dominant woody species. So there might just be 1 or 2 on the plot.
You might say winter fat.
Non-woody species.
Let's say winter fat too.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, I was saying
that.
Yeah, winter fat.
Got it. And for the non-woodies, the herbaceous species?
Buffalo grass.
Okay.
Blue grama.
All right. And blue grama. Great. Okay. And now these are the way we've got this set up, and you don't have to run your transects this way, but we've got it set up with 4 transects going each in the cardinal directions. Then we suggest that you pace out 5 paces, or about 5 yards, and we drop a stick. And the stick is here at the top of the screen. The stick has 5 marks. It doesn't even need to be a meter stick or a yardstick. It can be a twig that you've marked at these intervals. And at each of these points, for those of you that have done line point intercept, this is line point intercept, but with a stick. And we just use 20 sticks with 5 points, we get 100 points. And at each mark, then, I can record anything I'd like. So if the point falls under a tree or a tree canopy, remember it's actually you've got to have it's a point intercept. You've got to make sure that you're actually hitting something. In this case, I entered a perennial grass and litter. And each of these, if you click on it, the name of that category shows up at the bottom of the screen. So annual plants, that's woody litter, that's a plant base, and subshrubs and perennial forbs, shrubs. And we started, of course, with trees, and then down at the bottom, we've got rocks. So I'm essentially just doing line point intercept along this stick. And then if I'd like to, I can swipe left and the second screen shows up. You notice that for the swift fox, vegetation height was also quite important, and it was actually specified. And here we've just got height classes. Again, this is designed to be quick. It's not quite as precise as say, the AIM or NRI protocol, but it does generate data that can be compared with those protocols or the results of those protocols. And my height categories here are less than 4 inches, 4 to 18, 18 to 3 feet, and so on up to greater than 10 feet. And you can see that I'm essentially using that same stick to make those measurements. So I might carry 2 sticks. The other ones that we won't look at as much today, but you can record whether or not the stick falls entirely within a basal gap, meaning that one side of the stick can choose which side is either intersecting with the plant bases or not intersecting with plant bases. And then the same thing with a canopy gap. So if there's no intersection with a plant canopy along that entire strip, it's just a bare patch, completely bare of anything. Along that, you'd record that there's a canopy gap there. And then if you'd like, if you're doing, say, establishment, reseeding study, or you're trying to monitor an invasive species that's fairly rare right now, and you might not pick up on the line point intercept, you can record a species count here. So I don't know if juniper is occasionally invasive in that system, but I might want to keep an eye out for juniper seedlings and record how many I encounter in the 1 meter or 1 yard plot in front of that stick. So then I move down to the next one, and again, I can record that same information. What we found is that once you get going with this, It takes about a minute to record one stick with all of those measurements that I indicated and walk to the next 5 paces. Okay, so you figure, 5 seconds for each of those points on the line point, that's 20 seconds, maybe another 10 seconds to determine the height, another 5 seconds to determine the gaps, and then you count your species and you spend 10 seconds walking to the next point. So pretty quick, and one of the nice things about it is you're not working along a line, so you get to stand up every minute and walk 5 paces, so it's easier on your back, or at least easier on my back. All right, so now I went ahead and entered an entire plot just before the call here, just with some data. I can also, of course, here record photos and notes. And in the next call, the next webinar, we'll talk about the new soil health module here in the center of the screen. But right now, I'm going to go back to the report, and you'll notice that these little green leaves showed up again. They hadn't shown up before because I'd actually opened those. And once you've opened it, the green leaf goes away because it basically just indicated there's something new there. We've actually entered new data. So there is some new stuff here. And if I go to soil ID and I scroll down there, one of the things we find is that it gives me water holding capacity. Okay. It's also, of course, giving me a summary of what the textures are there. Okay. And some additional information. Okay. But today we're focusing on vegetation. Again, I've still got my imagery there. That hasn't gone away. But I've got some LandCover information. So you notice this little caret down, and I guess it'd probably be good if we put a little leaf there to show we've gotten information there as well. And it's graphed the data. Okay, and this is all offline. So you need to be online to initially download the habitat information for your location. So if you're going to be someplace that you're offline, definitely want to go to the map, find the location, create the plot. It will download all that soil information, all that habitat information, but then the graphing and everything occurs offline. So you can actually do a plot and then look at your graphs. And so my total cover was about 55%, 45% bare ground. Foliar cover was also 55%, indicating that all of the cover I had either was a plant or a plant with litter underneath it. So there wasn't any litter out and exposed. I did have 10% herbaceous litter, all of which looks like was underneath the foliar cover, and a little bit of woody litter, 2%, meaning just 2 of my points out of 100 hit woody litter. Not surprising given the low shrub cover there. Now, if I'd like to break it out, I can go down and again, what I'm seeing is what I guessed correctly, Terry, I guess, in terms of not having been there, but what we'd expect to see. So see, you don't even need to go to the field anymore. You can just fill out your data sheets. No, please don't do that. Perennial grass, 43% in the blue, no tree cover, shrub cover is about 5%. Canopy height, again, we've got that distribution. So now what I want to do, I'm going to close that up. Let's go down to habitat, and let's look at that Swift fox. And so now I can actually compare what the range is to what the data I actually collected. Okay, it's not telling me whether it's good or bad habitat, but I can make my own conclusions. And I've got loamy sand all the way down to 20 inches, and it says loam to sandy loam for digging dens. Okay, now loamy sand is coarser than a sandy loam. Might that be a problem? Why could that potentially be a problem for Swift fox? It's pretty coarse, which means that den might collapse. Okay, so maybe not. It's easy to dig, but it's also easy to cave in. So maybe not the perfect habitat, and a lot of it would just kind of depend on the overall soil structure. But we're close. Percent shrub cover, less than 5%, and I recorded 5% there. Vegetation height, less than 10 inches. So here now you need to do a little bit of interpretation, because what we're doing is we're not giving you an average vegetation height, because that's not actually all that helpful. The average vegetation height, you could have one tree that's 50 feet tall and all of the rest of it has, you know, basically bare ground. And that might be fine for a swift fox, because basically they can see really well and they can see into the tree. So what we've done instead is we've said, okay, what proportion of those points are less than 4 inches, and what are in the 4 to 18 inch range, which is kind of right where your max is. And if you add those two together, you get 85%. Okay, well, that's not too bad. We clearly do have some shrub cover, and this might give you some ideas of, okay, if I was really trying to improve the habitat or maintain habitat for swift fox, I might keep an eye on that shrub cover, and I might want to continue to monitor over time. And this can also help you then decide, okay, if I'm looking at where I should monitor, I may not need to monitor my entire ranch or my entire allotment or property. I may just want to focus on those areas that are at or near a threshold, a management threshold, not necessarily a threshold from a state and transition perspective, but if I'm managing for a particular species, I can set management thresholds based on things like we've got in this data. And so it becomes a very helpful management tool at that point. And then, of course, I can download the fact sheet.
Thank you, Jeff.
With that, Terry,
yeah, I was just about to say we should move back to the presentation quick. And if you want to stop sharing that, I will start sharing the PowerPoint. And I think you're still up, though, to keep providing the information.
All right, so what's new? We mentioned the soil health module. We'll talk about that next week. The new info indicators, that's the leaves on the screen. So you've got some idea of what to poke at. The land cover and trends imagery, we looked at that. Coming soon, we are developing a utilization module that will include 2 of the methods for utilization. Of course, there are quite a number that people use for the landscape appearance of key species. Next.
All right.
And again, I didn't emphasize this when we were looking at the app, but the question marks text basically brings up some explanation on explaining how to collect the data. We haven't fully populated the app with question mark text, and in fact, what I just showed, the land cover, the vegetation cover, has relatively little guidance information there, but we do have training videos available on the website for all of these modules, except for soil health. And finally, global use. I think you can scan this. I think we mentioned this in the last webinar, but widely used throughout the world for a lot of different purposes. And we welcome feedback from those. Obviously, this particular session is focused on North America, with a lot of the species obviously extending ranges in Canada and Mexico, but a lot of other uses for other parts of the app in other parts of the world. And certainly the land cover was developed in cooperation with folks in Kenya. So that can more resources here.
Now, question. Hopefully you guys have been popping things into the chat, and we'll bring back our helpers here to ask any questions that have come up. No questions yet in the chat? All right. It's not that shy a group, I'm sure. Anybody have any questions?
Or comments on the this is we've just started to let folks know about the availability of the habitat module, and we're definitely looking for feedback.
We just got a question from Hans Peter. Is the trends.earth map available for the whole world?
It is, yeah. So when you create a plot anywhere in the world now, you will get trends.earth, those satellite images and the trends in NBBI and so forth. And this is This was developed by, it's a service provided by the Conservation International with funding from the Global Environment Facility.
We have another question. This one is about how to select an area for measurement.
Sure, yeah. So there are a few ways. Obviously, if you're at the location, you simply click the plus at the top of the screen. And then if you have not, if you're not at the location, go down to the bottom of the screen and there's a little map or a little globe icon. You click on that globe icon, you can navigate anywhere in the world and either create a plot, or if you'd like to, simply view the soil information. In the future, we hope to improve this so that you can also just access habitat information without creating a plot. But creating a plot's pretty simple. You just give it a name and you've got a plot.
So our next question is from Anya, and it's about what it looks like when you have multiple sets of vegetation data for a single site.
Thanks, Anya. I knew somebody was going to ask me that question, and I meant to put in 2 sets of data, and I got distracted on email for that particular site. But yeah, it basically it does plot the trends over time, and that also shows up on the screen. So welcome to try that yourself, and we'll make sure that we have examples of that up on the web too.
Hans-Peter has a follow-up question. Which of the indicators of trends.earth do we use?
Oh, well, Hans-Peter, I would encourage you to go ahead and open the app for your own location, and you can see them. But it's basically the greenness trends is what we're looking at.
Someone would like to know if the trends for greenness are all taken at the same time each year.
Yeah, so there's additional information there on the question mark text, and then even more on Conservation International's website. But they've developed a consistent protocol to ensure that that you've got consistency, and they're actually, I think, averaging, if I recall correctly, I believe they're actually averaging over a suite of satellite imagery series.
So I just wanted to recognize that we said we were going to go 45 minutes. We're going a little bit beyond that. We will stay here for the rest of the hour, but I wanted to make sure that we do a poll, and Keegan's going to drop the poll in, and please answer that question just so that we grab everybody. And as I said, we'll stay and keep answering questions, but I want to make sure we get most people answering the poll. Thank you.
We have a question from Dennis. Do you have any plans of enriching the baseline data for LandPKS, especially for countries with multiple micro ecosystems like Uganda?
Yeah, Dennis, good to see you. And I think we might have touched on the complexity of Uganda in previous conversations, but basically the soil data are, I mean, it's essentially the FAO world map of the world. And we will be providing the soil grids information sometime later this year, which then will provide further refinement and additional information. As far as the species goes, yeah, that gets really challenging, and we don't currently have funding to expand beyond North America relative to the species that's provided through Habitat, but everything else in the app really is appropriate for use in Uganda. In fact, given the fact the app was originally developed largely in East Africa, may be particularly relevant there. Good question.
Let me go to the last slide here. Just to remind everyone that a week from today, we have our final in our 3-part series here, talking about monitoring soil health using LandPKS. And we wanted to highlight and thank our partners. And I already mentioned, we don't have it up here, but for the habitat module in particular, that Bird Conservancy of the Rockies has been a strong partner as well. Thank you all for attending. Appreciate your coming in and learning with us.